There are so many disadvantages of an established enterprise to working with a startup. Then he says, okay, is there anything else that I did not see or did not get a chance to evaluate? Now, this is code word for I didn't like what I saw and I want to cover my ass. And we went from like 0 to 1 million, I think in about a few months, less than a year. And then we went from 1 to 10 in like a year and a half or something. And then from 1 to 100 million, it took us 4.5 years.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the Product Market Fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you.
Dean, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be on.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, man. I was just going through Crunchbase here on Axonius. It says you raised $865 million. Is that accurate?
No, that's not accurate.
Okay. How much have you raised today?
About 500 million, yeah.
Half of a massive number, still a massive number. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You know, we were talking earlier and you were telling me that when you started off, you didn't even know if you could raise like a seed round.
Yeah, we didn't think we could raise any money in the beginning and we thought we would need to bootstrap. But things surprised us and it took a different course.
It's funny how things go, man. Well, let's start at the beginning. I mean, maybe just as the first question, what is Axonius? What do you guys do?
We help organizations see everything connected to their digital environment, then make sure that it's secure and taking all the action around it.
For somebody that's outside of cyber, like everything kind of sounds the same. You know, it's like we keep things secure. Like, where do you kind of fit relative to other players?
We're a category that we created, which actually is a long story about category creation versus category conquest. But we created a category called cyber asset management or cyber asset attack surface management, initials CASM, that ended up being picked up by the industry sort of analysts, major firms like Gartner and Forrester and others. So we really created our own category and now we're the leader and dominant player in that category.
This company started in 2017, but I'm sure the idea came before that. Maybe give me just your background first. Like, what were you doing before you started Axonius?
Sure. So in short about me, I'm originally from Israel, and I had a pretty challenging childhood growing up, both economically, socially, and that's what made me very entrepreneurial as a person, because I always knew that I had to earn everything I wanted out of life and I had to be really independent. And I really loved computers, right? Like I learned how to program from a book from the library when I was 12. I was part of the team that won the International Robotic Olympics in South Korea when I was 15. And I finished my bachelor's degree when I was 19, then went into Unit 8200, which is the signals intelligence unit of Israel, very famous for its...
I think we've had others on the show from that same unit.
Yeah, numerous alumni that are great cybersecurity founders. And then after 8200, I was there for 5 years, finished as a captain, won all the awards you can think of, and had very meaningful service.
What's that world like, by the way, just to go on a tangent? I mean, I'm sure there's a million things you can't share, but from what you can share, like, what's it like being inside of that?
What a big question. On the one hand, you are doing some of the most exciting things possible technologically. And again, I'm trying to share as much as I can, which is not a lot. And yet on the other, you're in the army, right? And in the army, like, you know, I still had to do guard duty. Like I had to go out and just like be a guard somewhere for a week, a couple times a year, or I'd be, you know, eating like not great food, or I had to sleep in a bunk in the same room with 14 other guys. And you had this like dumb bureaucracy. So like, it's always this weird balancing act between I'm part of this very complex bureaucratic organization. And at the same time, I'm doing some of the most innovative technical things with some of the smartest people in the world doing that together. So it's sort of a weird mentality. And I actually have told other people, like, there's a lot of learnings that I've gotten to about enterprise sales from the army, because you have to think about it that way, right? Like
politically, you mean?
I mean, like when you're trying to get something to happen in a large organization, it's never by just making somebody realize it's good for them. You have to have an understanding of what influence each player has over a certain decision, what incentive each player has over a certain decision, right? And then you have to sort of understand how all these things play off against each other in order to be able to get that decision to happen. And most of the time, that's not even depending on whether the organization will benefit from it or not. It's more just like these set of people can work together to achieve something under all the dependencies that they have.
And what about the stakes and the pressure? Like, do you find that what you were responsible for, let's say, in your time in the Army prepares you or in any way level sets you when you're a founder and you feel like you have the world on your shoulders, but in a sense, it's not life or death anymore sort of thing?
For sure. So, you're not out there in combat, right? So there's no bullets, next to, flying next to your head or whatever. So you don't feel that. But I think it really depends on the person in Unit 8200 compared to we could pick your comparable in another large Western country. There's not a lot of people. It's the biggest unit in the Army. But when I finished the elite course that I was doing it with 30 other guys who were the best in cybersecurity in the country at that point in time and that age. And it was amazing to be able to go through that. But it was just 30 of us. And we had gotten dispersed over the different units, the different sections of the intelligence community in Israel. And you get to your team, and I got to the team, and we had this project. And this project was involved in this big intelligence operation or campaign or capability. And then you realize you're in the bottleneck of that intelligence campaign being successful or not. If you're successful in your technical project, then that enables the intelligence campaign to work. And if you're not, then that intelligence campaign is just not going to work. And then you realize, wait, it's my team that's the only one doing it. So if we're not successful, literally, you can see the impact on even your family and your friends. Are they going to be more or less secure by the work that I do every single day? Because it's that direct impact. And to some people, they don't want that burden of responsibility on them, and they just come into work, right, and just do their work. But for some people, if you embrace that responsibility and you're like, wait, I have this period of my life that I can give everything, and what I will get in return is so immensely meaningful, then you embrace that responsibility. And it pushes you to really think about something bigger than yourself and makes you a lot more able to really put your own limitations aside and strive for something more.
When you end up leaving there, where do you go? Do you join a different startup?
Yeah, so when I was finishing my service, I was trying to figure out what to do with my life because I knew I'd be a terrible employee.
Why is that, by the way? I mean, you're in the Army context, you're used to following orders and these sort of things, working within, like you said, a big system. I
think one of the things that made me successful in the Army is I never took the rules at face value. I always tried to understand, I never broke any rules, don't get me wrong. I'm not a chaotic agent, but in sales, you have to understand, why are the rules there? And sometimes even realize that sometimes the rules are working against that organization's incentives. And there are ways of using that to make things happen, that are more a level above as far as how do you use that to create action, to create change, right? So I think that's why I would have probably been a terrible employee, because I always saw what the job is and not what my job is, right? I never was hey, I get the stuff that I need to do and I'll do that. And great. I always try to see where does this fit in? What's the larger impact? And I guess it's the curse of being an entrepreneur, whether you like it or not. And I wish I could turn that off. But I could never just see my own role in something. I always try to understand what's the bigger mission and try and make that happen. And to the credit of Unit 8200, that place, it's not easy to do that there, but it's also something that organization encourages, right? They encourage you to innovate. They encourage you to take initiative and do creative things. So as I was leaving the Army, I was I know a lot technically about cybersecurity, but I have zero understanding of the world outside of the Army. I don't know what a product sale looks like. I don't know what a customer does. I don't know how to build a company. So I ended up joining this guy who had already had an idea and had raised some funding, was looking for a technical co-founder. And that was a great school for me. It was called Symmetria. We did Y Combinator. We raised about $15 million. We had some good customers. But ultimately, that failed because we were in the wrong category. We were at this like hype cycle, creating this new thing that didn't end.
And what was your role in that company?
I was the CTO and co-founder.
Okay.
And the idea for Axonius came about when I was there. We were working with one of the largest companies in North America, and we had discovered that they had been breached. We had really found this computer, this machine in their network that we saw for 100% confidence was infected by this APT, is the term we use in cyber, advanced persistent threat, meaning this is not just like a virus or some random thing. There is a group of people who are well-funded and who are very specific about this target who are manipulating this threat. And there were a lot of other cybersecurity vendors who had researched this group and attributed them to the Chinese government. So literally we could see this computer, hey, there's, a Chinese state level threat hacking your company through this computer. And I took this information to the security team there and I told them about it. And to my surprise, they didn't have a big reaction to it. And the reason was apparently they got tipped off that this was happening. That's why they brought us in. But the other reason was they told me there's nothing they can do about it. Now, once you discover a company's been breached, there's this process called incident response that like, what do you do about it? And the first few steps is you take whatever information you have and you try to map out the threat, right? So like the only information we had was here's this device that was infected and we had its IP address, we had its host name. And the next thing I would want it to do was to go into it and look at its activity, right? Look at the files, look at the processes, look at the logins and network traffic, and then you can map out the threat. But when I took that information to the team, I told them, here's the IP address, here's the host name. And again, this is one of the best security programs in the world. What they told me was they had no idea what this device was. They didn't know who owned it. They didn't know why it was in their environment. They didn't know how to access it. And that to me was shocking. But the more I talked to them, the more I kept talking to other security teams and IT teams. Actually, everybody kept telling me sort of the same thing. We don't really know everything that's connected to our environment. We don't really have a good understanding on it.
How is that possible? How does that happen?
That was the billion-dollar question, right? Like, why was this still a pain in 2017 when we started to think about it and talk to people about it? Because companies of that scale or of any scale, like already had dozens of different products. People had already called this different names before us, like asset discovery or network discovery. And they would use the same approach that stopped working a while ago, but nobody realized it. And that approach was like trying to scan the network, meaning just really go out into the network layer of an organization and just ask everything what's on there. It's sort of like, how do you map out all the people who live in a city? You literally go to every door, you knock and you ask who's there. And if somebody doesn't answer, then you're not going to know anything about them, right? Like, and that was what was starting to happen in the world. Everybody thought that they could just scan the network and then figure out what they had. But because of the encryption of the networking layer, because devices stopped sharing information on the network layer and just through the internet, then that stopped working. There was a new approach that had to be brought in to solve the problem, right? And like that example of a city, how do you know all the people who live in a city? If you go knock on every door and ask them, who are you? Like, you're not going to find out anything and you're going to miss a lot of people. It's going to take a lot of time. The right answer is to just have all the IDs of all the people who are registered to that, like cities, tax authority or like utility bills or whatever. And by the way, that's spread out over many different data sources, right? Like you can ask the utility company and you can ask the water company or you can ask the tax authority. But if you ask all the different sources, at the end of the day, you'll find all the people who live in that city, the DMV, right? So that's exactly what we did. We created this new approach that we call the adapter approach. Instead of knocking on every door, let's go into all the existing data sources that an organization already has. And we built all these adapters. Today, we have over 1,300 of them that you just give us an API key or a credential to all your existing tooling. And then we pull all the data together. And just like a puzzle, we put all the pieces together and show you exactly what you have. And that's that category that we ended up creating.
And walk me through, like, this is kind of end state where you're at today. I mean, like, do they recognize that this is a massive problem, or are they more like nonchalant about it? Like, well, this is just the way it is and it's fine. Like, we've gone so far with it, so who cares?
So it was very non-orthodox, I think, the path that we took to product market fit. And I have this framework of thinking about it, if you'll want to hear.
Please.
When selling products to businesses, when selling enterprise software, I think a company's journey and the way that it's successful in getting to product market fit and growing way beyond that depends on the positioning of the problem that they're solving. So one type of positioning is when it's an established category. It's already something that people spend money on. It's very well defined. And then somebody creates a new technology to solve that problem, right? Classic example is like what Salesforce did in CRM. Everybody already had CRM, right? Like in Siebel Systems and SAP and all that other stuff, Oracle. And what they ended up doing was doing the exact same thing just as a SaaS product for the first time. Or in cybersecurity, for example, we hear that a lot when something is called next gen, right? So like CrowdStrike, that's a next gen endpoint protection. Palo Alto, the OGs, right? Like they were the next gen firewall. When you're doing that, your buyer is very mature. They know exactly what they're looking for. They probably already have an RFP list of like 100 different items. So every time you sell in that kind of journey, there are two things that happen. One is that every sale is very competitive because there are already the incumbents, right? Like, and obviously there might be new competitors doing the same thing as you. So every sale is with a lot of different actors. And the second thing is the budget's already there. So it's just like competitive sports. You don't need to win by 100 points. Whoever wins at the end of that POC, that refresh cycle, by even 1 point gets the win, right? So those kinds of journeys are very sales-based, right? Those companies still need to do product well and marketing well, but the way they win, the way they become dominant is by being the best at sales because they understand the deal mechanics the most. They understand how the buyer's gonna make a decision. And that's how those next-gen something companies end up being successful. They're like super strong on sales. They understand how to replace the incumbent and take over the budget. The other kind of journey is I think when there's a new area of technology that's a vacuum and then people have no idea what to buy, but they're trying to buy something, right? We're right now going through this exactly with the world of LLMs, right? Like when you go to a CIO today and you ask them, what are you buying for your LLM or what are you buying for your Gen AI? Most of them will tell you, I have no idea. I'm just like experimenting or I already have a contract with Microsoft or with Amazon or whatever. I'm just using what I'm getting already. And this happens in a lot of different fields. In cyber, for example, the biggest example of that is Wiz, which is an amazingly successful company. The biggest VC acquisition in history, right? VC-backed company acquisition in history. And they did the exact same thing in cloud security, right? There's this new thing called the cloud. You now need to secure it. Most people had no idea what that means. Definitely, they don't have an RFP or budget line for it. So when they're trying to solve that kind of problem, they will go to their colleagues, they will go to their partners, they will go to the people they trust, and they'll just ask them, what's the best out there? So it's sort of a race to what becomes the industry standard. And the way to win there is just to have the biggest brand. And when I say the biggest brand, it's not necessarily the most dollars or the biggest company. The biggest brand means that when people think about that problem, you are the one that comes up the most.
Is that a product thing? Because I thought you were going to go sales and product. Would you go sales and brand, or is it a marketing thing?
I think it's both a marketing and product thing, but they both contribute together to a brand. Like one of the things that Wiz, I think, did.
I was going to ask it in a tangent. What did Wiz get right? Because it is such an insane story how fast they grew to 100, and just how much they overtook.
Yeah. So first of all, from a marketing perspective, they were very creative. They were very different in their brand than everybody else. But they also did a lot of different things to make their brand stand out. One is they use their fundraising as a brand tool, which is, it has its pros and cons, but they kept raising many, many different rounds, kept raising their valuation. And that's a very dangerous game, by the way, but for them, they were able to pull it off very effectively. And people kept hearing about them, kept talking about them. And the other one is, I think that they were really able from a product perspective to understand what's the thing that's going to make customers promote them the most. Not necessarily what creates the most product value, but what's going to make their users tell other users, hey, if you're buying your first cloud security tool or you want to look at your cloud security strategy, you have to look at these guys, right?
What was that for them, actually? I'm curious, because cybersecurity is not, inherently viral or word of mouthy or whatever.
So that's something that we also did really well, and that's time to value. It's funny, I heard a CISO do a podcast. This guy was a CISO of a public company, and he talked about what kind of security products he loves. And then they asked, what are the ones that you love the most? And he said, Wiz and Axonius. And then they asked him, well, why? And he said, with both of them, the time to value was almost immediate. I had spent very little effort to see an immense amount of value. So I think that was the key factor for them and for us as well.
To pull on that thread, it's an insightful comment. I'm just thinking about even in the consumer use cases, what are the products that make you go, wow? And a lot of it isn't about long-term, how dependent you are on them, or not to say those products don't have PMF or that you don't use them or whatever, but the products that you're wanting to go tell other people about immediately are the ones where you use it, you download it, whatever, and you get some value, just so quickly. Recently I used a company called Whisperflow, which is the next gen, let's say, dictation app, but it just works as well as you would want a dictation app to ever work, formatting everything. And the time to value is immediate because you download, you click a button and you use it. And I told 10 different people about it just because it was so impressive and it was so fast. And I also knew that they would get that value so quickly, which is part of why, you spread word of mouth. Anyways, that was an interesting way to think about it.
Exactly. The thing that people don't understand, this is even truer, the bigger enterprise sales you go, the more this is true, is that companies have budgets, they have resources, and they will put those into buying products, but only if they can trust the outcome. This is, again, the word trust here is the most important, because when an organization buys, this is what we talked about before, it's people betting their careers on that decision being successful for them. There's this saying, nobody got fired for buying from IBM. Now that's not true anymore, right? What that saying means, and it's that trust factor, when you're talking to a VP or C-level person, you want them to put budget into your product. What you need to make them feel is that there's a minimum of risk of them ending up looking like they made a mistake, right? And the more you can guarantee to them, that will make them look good, that will make them see the value for their organization. They're going to bet heavily on you, right? People want to buy products. People want to create value for their company. They just don't want to waste or make mistakes, right? And if you can show value very quickly with very little effort, you've already done that, right? They already know that it's going to be a great decision because the values are already there, right? It's sort of like an investment, you get the interest up front, right? Why wouldn't you do that? There's no way to lose. So that's why it's so important.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how did you create value quickly in enterprise where there's so much that usually needs to be done in terms of onboarding and getting everybody in access and this and that? How do you shorten the time to, like you said, at least some value?
We have tens of thousands of people who have followed the show. Are you one of those people? You want to be a part of the group. You want to be a part of those tens of thousands of followers. So hit the follow button.
So it came to us in two dimensions. And then I want to go back to that framework of the three different journeys that companies go through, because that plays into that exactly. So the way we got value quickly was because our technical approach, the new thing that we invented, that adapter approach of connecting to your existing tools and then pulling the data together, that meant that to do that took very little effort, at least for the critical mass of products, right? You can connect 4, 5, 10 products with APIs within a few minutes. It doesn't take that much work. But then we realized the big value we can show in every organization and very quickly is the larger the organization, the more likely there's blind spots. Or when I say blind spots, I don't just mean stuff the security team doesn't see. It's also hey, there's this team that uninstalled a bunch of your controls and nobody knows about. Or there's this part of your company that you never sent patches for, nobody updated. Or there's somebody who connected this super risky IoT device to your data center you never even saw. There's always these gaps that every organization has. And if you surface them, you're hey, look, you spent a few minutes connecting us. We are already showing you gaps that are huge risks that you can fix without you needing to do anything more. And that's not the long-term value by any means, But at that point, they're like, well, I can't not see this anymore.
Are you able to do that before going through an RFP, before kind of closing a deal and all these sort of things, like somehow really early before any of that?
Yeah. So we have this proof of value process or proof of concept process. It's usually under 30 days. We just coordinated with the customer. We've also experimented with that from a self-service motion, and that's really hard to pull off because people are very privacy-minded, right? Like they don't want to share information with something unless it's a person they talk to or they have an NDA in place. But the sales process is incredibly fast because we don't ask them anything besides like, hey, just connect some of your APIs to us. We can do that in your environment or in ours, whatever you prefer. And then you'll see a bunch of things that you can't say no to anymore, right? And that's how we get the sale very quickly. So to us, we talked about the first journey of like a new technology in an existing category. And then we talked about the journey of there's a completely new category that people flock to the industry standard or the biggest brand. And then there's this third kind of problem that I think is true for us. And there's another analogy I will give to another company that had the same kind of path, which is when a problem sort of gradually evolves into something else, right? So there was this problem of asset discovery, network discovery, that had a solution to scan the network, go over, when people were in a castle, you could go to each door and knock and people would tell you like who they are. But once you move to becoming a city, that doesn't work anymore. And that's what happened. Organizations used to be able to just scan their network, but then gradually that stopped working. And what ended up happening was people just sort of accepted the way things are. And they were very cynical. And you'd ask people, do you have this pain? They would say, yes, of course, everybody does. And then we'd ask them, well, are there any products that solve it? And they'll say there are 100 that will tell you they do, but no one does. And in that kind of journey, it's not your sales or your brand that's going to solve the problem. You have to do two things really, really well in order to be able to break through that kind of customer journey. One is your messaging has to be super accurate. You really have to decide, what do you call your category? What do you call the problem space? How do you differentiate from what they already know and make them realize that there is an opportunity to solve it after 100 other companies told them they would and they didn't? And then you have to tie that with very fast time to value, because you have to make them trust the fact that you're not just claiming claims like the other companies. And if you do that, you will have fanatical, favorable fans for customers. And we have one of the highest NPS scores that we know of in cybersecurity. It's like high 70s, low 80s. I don't know of any other cybersecurity product that has that kind of fandom. And you talk to our customers, they'll be like, where were you my entire career? I wish like this existed when I started my career. And the analogy for that, another great example is you can look at Datadog and observability, right? Like when that started, is this a debugging tool? Is this a log tool? Is this like an application performance tool? And they had to reposition that whole thing and call it this new name called observability. And now everybody would say, yeah, of course I need to have an observability solution. But back then, they had to create that mentality, right? And realign how the customers were thinking about it.
What's the key difference between the second and the third, like between this new market, like a Wiz, Cloud and Wiz, and Datadog? Is it that it's an existing market that slowly becomes a new market, but nobody really knows it? Is that how you might kind of frame that third journey?
Yeah, I think the difference between the second and the third is in the second, you have this like moment in time where you suddenly get a lot of attention and everybody's competing for their attention because it's the trend, it's the hype, it's what everybody's trying to put their time and priority into. And the third is sort of like this dormant, gigantic pain that people don't necessarily see. And once you do unearth it, it has a huge market opportunity behind it.
That's a good place to go back into the storyline. You have that discussion, you see this space and this framing that you have with these three categories. Does that become clear later, or do you realize at that point what kind of journey you're going to go into?
I think in the beginning, we realized this is not going to be a next-gen something because people didn't have a dedicated budget line for it. And we also realized this is not going to be a new trend because it's a problem that people have had for many, many years. So we start to understand, like, how do we get budget? Should we create a category? Should we attach to an existing category and try to change it? This positioning is very, very important for enterprise buyers and in crowded industries like cyber, because people will always ask you like, okay, which budget line should I be using? Because that also determines who's the real buyer, right? Who's the influencer? And we realize that this is a security team problem. And yet historically, it's been assigned to the IT team, right? There is a category called IT asset management, but it's actually about the life cycle of device. Like when do you buy laptops? When do you refresh them? All that kind of stuff. So we had to disconnect from that and we had to make it about the security buyer. So that's why we called it cyber asset management and created that category.
Then walk me through just on the fundraising side, because I'm sure that's important. Like you thought at first you were going to bootstrap. Why is that?
So, I'd had my experience of fundraising from YC and my previous company, and I understood that investors have a really hard time investing in that third journey, right? Like it's very easy for them to invest in a next gen something or invest in a new category. But if you're telling them, hey, this problem has been around for a long time and nobody solved it, that scares them.
Because there's no why now. There's no like, okay, why now? Why you? Like, okay, this is just the way it's going to be.
Exactly. Everybody asked me, well, why didn't anybody else solve it? And there's a saying in Hebrew, you can't prove you don't have a sister because you don't know what your dad did before you existed, right? Like, and that's what I told him. Like, I don't know why somebody else didn't solve this, but we knew we could and we knew we had. And that made it much harder to fundraise. So we thought we'd need to bootstrap. And we actually started to get these like side hustles to fund us while we build this up. But then what happened was there was this fund that was very dedicated to early stage cybersecurity seed rounds who had heard about us. And they just convinced me, just go, we'll connect you to a bunch of CISOs. And we just want to hear what they say about what you're talking about. Worst case, you'll get to know them. Like, there's nothing for you to lose from doing that. So I said, great, always love to talk to potential customers. And they put me in front of like a bunch of Fortune 500 CISOs, which was great. And then I told them, I didn't even talk to them about the solution. We didn't even think about what the solution was at that point. I just told them, this is the problem that everybody is suffering from. And we know how to approach this in a new way to solve it. And every single one of them told that VC, that investor, this is one of the biggest problems I have. And even more so, nobody's trying to solve this. Everybody sort of just accepted the way it is. That gave them so much validation about the market opportunity that they decided to just give us our seed round, and then we were off to the races.
Now, that's an important, by the way, fact I just want to point out. Like, it's as much as the problem was accepted, when you verbalized it to these customers, they knew that it was a massive problem that hopefully one day would be solved. It's not like they dismissed it as, who cares? I'm okay with status quo.
Oh, if they would have said it's a nice to have, or if that wasn't a priority, like that wouldn't have happened, right? Like, that's what investors look for, at least investors who are very tied to a certain kind of buyer or industry. They want that person to say, this is a huge priority for me, and I will take all the challenges of working with an early stage startup just if I can solve that problem.
And how much did you end up raising then?
$4 million.
What's the next step? Do you have an enterprise that's ready to pilot? How do you get like that first pilot?
So after that was a very hard time for us as a company because in cybersecurity, products are really black or white. It's not like the product works 50% and somebody will buy it for 50% the cost. It's either it works or it doesn't. What we built was like very challenging technically. So as soon as we had the funding and we realized the approach, at the same time as building the MVP, my co-founders on the technical side were working on that. I was starting to create the go-to-market work of trying to find design partners and early customers because we didn't want to wait, right? Like we wanted to parallelize these things. And also we really believed in that like agile approach of, if you're not embarrassed by your MVP, then you launch too late. We definitely didn't launch too late. We were very embarrassed by our MVP. And by the way, we had tried many different POCs before we got to our first customer and many of them failed.
What was the ask, by the way, in terms of the POC? Was it paid or really the ask was just to go through the motions, give you access, which is already maybe big enough?
There are so many disadvantages of an established enterprise to working with a startup. They know you're small. They know like you're risky legally. You're not going to have the stuff that they need from a diligence standpoint. So you have to really understand what's your advantages as a startup. And you only have two real advantages. One, you can really cater the initial set of value of the product to what they want because you're building it as you're talking to them, right? So you can do the things that they always wanted to get and nobody else would give them. So you really have to create this very very close relationship to the buyer, and you have to have them be your champion in that organization because they're going to fight for you much harder than to buy something from Microsoft, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is speed. You have to move very quickly and be very agile, right? Like you have to give them a version every day or like give them an update every day. And by the way, we talked about that trust. That's also another huge aspect of creating trust with a buyer in the enterprise is if they ask for something, they're usually expecting it to happen a few months down the line. But if you give them that in a matter of hours or days, it's like, wow, I can really trust that this company is going to deliver for me. Because if I'm asking for something and getting it within a few days, even if it's small, I know that whenever I'll need something, I'll be able to get it.
I don't think people appreciate just how important that is. I can tell you as an analogy, when we're, for example, considering an investment in a company and having that kind of initial touch points, the speed of response, it's the only window you have into that new relationship. And so from the founder's perspective, whether it's selling to an enterprise or pitching to a VC, whatever, you might imagine that like, well, you're doing all this work, you're doing all this stuff, you're a trustworthy person, you're a hardworking person, but the other person doesn't know what you do as soon as the call drops, the Zoom call ends or the email. All they know is they ask you to do something and a week later you come back. If somebody else does it a day later, I mean, it's just so impressive. They email you and you respond right away. You ask for something and you get it a day later. You're like, man, this person is on fire. Like either they only service me, which is great, or they're just so good that they can do this for everybody. I don't really care which it is. I'm just ecstatic. And to do that at the beginning, it can just change, I think, the direction of that relationship in a massive way.
Absolutely. Let me tell you the story of how we got our first customer, right? We went through all these failed POCs. We're starting to feel really bad. We're like, this is never going to work. Very depressing. You know, people start to get questioning whether we can pull it off or not. And then there was this customer who was POCing us. And I remember I was going to Black Hat in Vegas, which is one of the big cybersecurity conferences. And I was staying in the Luxor, which is one of the cheapest hotels on the strip because I was trying to save money. And I wake up in the morning and we had the POC readout call, like the final summary with the technical guy we were working with. And then I had the meeting with the economic buyer later that day. So I'm dreading this call because we had had a lot of bugs and a lot of issues throughout this call. And when we get on the call in the morning, and I'm getting up really early because it's Eastern time for the customer, and we just go through what we did in the POC, and then he says, okay, is there anything else in your offering that I did not see or did not get a chance to evaluate? Now, this is code word for I didn't like what I saw, and I want to cover my ass that when I say no, I don't recommend we do this. Nobody can come back and tell me, oh, you missed this thing or whatever. So I finished that call. I'm like super depressed. I'm like, I can't believe it. Another one like fails. And I just like, talked to my CMO at that time. And he told me, well, let's just think about what we actually did for them. What's our argument for like why they should buy? And I said like, look, we did bring them value that they wouldn't get from anything else. And we showed them meaningful gaps in their environment from a security standpoint. And also like we had a lot of bugs, but we reacted very quickly. And what he did was just make this slide of like, timeline, here's an issue, here's how long it took us to fix it. And there were like 20 of these issues, and over the span of 4 or 5 weeks, every time there was an issue, a day or two later, we had fixed it. Or there was a feature, they asked for a small feature, and we had added it. So the guy comes into the meeting, now it's at our nice suite that we use to host the customers, and I talked to him about it, and I show him the slides, and ask him, well, what do you think? And he said, it's great. I want to buy it. And that was like one of the most meaningful things in the journey of our company. And I asked him, well, that's great to hear. What made you decide that? And he said those exact same things to me that you just talked about. One, you showed me value that I couldn't get anywhere else, that I've been searching for my entire career to be able to solve. And it's just the initial value, but you proved that you guys are the ones who can deliver that for me. Nobody else can. And the second, yeah, you had a bunch of issues, but like as soon as I told you about something, I got some response or I got some progress. Most of my other vendors, they talk to me about which quarter they're going to respond to something. So that's why I can partner with you guys. That was our very first customer.
I love that. I mean, I heard it summarized by another founder once. You think when you're going to enterprise sales, you're selling ROI, and that's part of the equation. But the thing you have to remember is, as a startup, by definition, you have no credibility. So you need to find a way to show credibility. And it's these little micro actions that get you there in that POC a lot of time. So now you land your first kind of your first customer, correct?
Yeah, first paying customer.
What does that look like, by the way? Is that like a 6-figure deal, 7-figure deal, much smaller? Like, what does it start as?
When you're creating a category, you have to find your pricing because people don't know what to pay for it. So you have to start to find ways of how to create this anchoring on price. So I basically asked him, how much would you pay for this? And he came to me and he said, this would replace like a full-time employee for me as far as manual work, at least. So just give me a discount because I know I'm an early customer. Just give me a discount on what a full-time person will cost. So it was like, I think a high 5-figure deal, ARR, a yearly subscription. Today, that would be like, like a 6-figure deal for us for that size organization. Yeah.
And where was the product at? Like, do you go from here to deploying, or do you go from here to like actually building like a production level product that you can then deploy?
Yeah, I'd say like our deployment is very easy. So it didn't take a lot more effort to deploy, but to extract all the value, there was more work to get there with them.
And do you go all in on this one customer, or you start selling and trying to add as many customers in parallel?
Yeah, we started to get a lot of customers, and actually that started like a huge flywheel for us. And we went from like 0 to 1 million, I think in about a few months, less than a year. And then we went from 1 to 10 in like a year and a half or something.
Oh, wow.
And then from 1 to 100 million, it took us 4.5 years. So one of the fastest ever in cybersecurity.
Maybe let's talk about a couple of those inflection points. The first one being that 0 to 1, which is you get that first customer. And then you said you hit $1 million ARR in less than a year. Like what happened after that first customer that made things flow more easily?
So you had to match that exact journey that I talked about. You have to match the messaging and you have to match the time to value, right? If you have those two things and you can teach people to do those, like the people you hire, then it just explodes, right? But we had to unlock both of them. And by the way, to me, the messaging part was way harder.
What changed on the messaging? Because you had just failed a bunch of POCs. Then this one, you finally managed to get it over. And then clearly all the other ones mainly went over. So like, what changed?
So the messaging was that we realized that we had to create our own category name. We had to target the security team as the buyer and yet involve the IT side as a supporting function. So you don't want to make them adversaries, but also you want to get in through security. And the last thing is the way we priced was to find this equation to show them that it's ROI based, right? It's like, hey, you're already going to spend this money on a failed audit or on manual work or not utilizing tools you've already subscribed to, or all these other things. You never want to just have the pricing be a negotiation. You want it to be, hey, like, if you can make an investment or you get the interest up front, it's a no-brainer to do. So that's part of the messaging is like, hey, this is a new category you don't have a budget for, but you already have a budget that you can use for this and all these other buckets that this would be the most effective way for you to use.
Walk me through the getting different champions, getting different people to support the deal is key to enterprise sales. Like, especially on the security side, it's clear it's this ROI. It's very much the value prop is direct for them. On IT, what do you tell them to get them to support the initiative?
So the first thing is never call anybody's baby ugly, right? So like a lot of times we would find gaps that could make people defensive, right? Like we'd say, hey, this control or this like architecture, there's a bunch of problems with it. So instead of going and telling these people, hey, you did a terrible job, what you want to do is tell them, hey, using our solution, we can help you be world-class excellent at this because everybody is at that point of lack of execution that we're seeing here for you, right? And that way you can make even security, usually security and IT are very frictionful towards each other because sometimes they have conflicting incentives. For example, security has sometimes an incentive to lock things down and make them slower because then it's less risky. And IT has the opposite. They want to make things fast and not lock things down because their incentive is speed and operational efficiency, right? But what we did was, hey, using our solution, you can finally not have a conflict over what's the data, right? Like here, we're connecting both your systems. We're connecting the IT systems, we're connecting the security systems. We're showing you the deduplicated data Now you can effectively work together and not get into these arguments over what's the reality. So we found a way to have them be in alignment using our solution instead of it being another factor of friction.
And then this is a bit post-product market fit, but what do you think was the unlock from 1 to 10? I see a lot of companies directly that get to $1 million, whether it's in a year or 2 years, seem to have real PMF, but then from 1 to 10, it just starts to slow, and it's so slow, it's like just becomes a grind. In your case, it actually accelerated.
So you have to be really honest with yourself if the way you got from 0 to 1 was because of the market opportunity or because of your hustle as a founder. And that's sort of what happened to me in my previous company. We got to $1 million in ARR, but to be honest, there was no real market opportunity there. It was because we were hustling as founders, right? Like we made enough people like us enough and knew we would work our ass off for them. Even if it wasn't the product we were selling them, they just knew that working with us would make them successful. And you could never copy that to 100 AEs and make them be able to do that. What you need to ask yourself is, if the way I got from 0 to 1 gave me a recipe that I can pick up an AE from the street and make them be able to do the same thing I just did. If that's the case, then you're going to accelerate from 1 to 10. And there are always questions. You're always questioning yourself in everything. That's true. And you always have to hustle as a founder anyway. But if there isn't a very clear recipe of like, how do I take an AE from the street and make them do what I just did to get from 0 to 1, then you have to really ask yourself why, because that's the difference.
And when did you feel like you'd found like true product market fit?
That first customer, that was August of 2018. Then in the end of 2018, we had raised our Series A from Bessemer. They're one of the best VCs in the world, one of the best brands. And I totally give them as much credit as I will give any VC because I've seen everything and there's a lot of bad things I would say VCs do as well. But they've been amazing and they really saw our potential, invest in us when we were just a handful of customers because of how passionate those customers were about us. About like, hey, this solves a problem I've had for so long and nobody can really solve this. And they said, we've never heard customers in cybersecurity say the word love about a product. And they said they loved you guys. So they invested in us. And then in February, I think, of that year, we went to the RSA conference. That's also the other big cybersecurity conference in the US. And we had won that startup competition. It's called Innovation Sandbox. The winners of that competition are all like multi-billion-dollar companies, some of the biggest public companies and everything. So that day we won it. We had also announced the Bessemer investment just like a month before, I think. I even remember my head of sales, the first sales hire we hired, he said, I never thought I'd say this in my career, but he told our marketing guy, like, please stop the leads, like in handle.
That's product market fit.
Then you have product market fit, right?
And then was there, on the flip side, like ever a time where you actually doubted things and maybe thought things might not work out?
There are many times, especially that period right before we got our first customer, because I just started to question whether it's feasible to have a product that does that in a scalable way. But what gave me conviction was how deeply I understood the problem and how big the problem was. Like those two things together, I knew this is a huge problem that everybody suffers from, and I knew we understood it better than anybody else. And those two things made me realize that, regardless of the challenge in front of me, that's the recipe for really, large-scale success.
And then last thing, if you could say like one piece of advice to an early stage founder, what would it be?
Only do it if being an entrepreneur is the only career path you see for yourself. Otherwise, it's really just not worth it. Don't do it for any other reason besides the fact that you feel that your calling is to be an entrepreneur, and that's the only thing you'll feel fulfillment and meaning by. And if that's the case, then go ahead and try and get as much advice from more experienced founders as you can. But don't do it because it's cool or because you think you're going to make a lot of money or because, somebody else is expecting you to.
Awesome, man. Well, dude, it's been great having you on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Pablo.
Wow, what an episode. You're probably in awe. You're in absolute shock. You're like, that helped me so much. So guess what? Now it's your turn to help someone else. Share the episode in the WhatsApp group you have with founders. Share it on that Slack channel. Send it to your founder friends and help them out. Trust me, they will love you for it.